The magnetism of the outdoors can be a double-edged sword. When everything you thought was going well in your life goes apart in an instant, what do? How far can the darkness of someone who seemed so harmless go? One fateful night in February 1994 would reveal a story no one could have anticipated. Karen Newell, a woman of captivating beauty and vibrant energy, had built her life on a foundation of self-improvement and resilience. If you're fascinated by unraveling the darkest mysteries and exploring gripping true crime stories, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and become part of our investigative community. Let's dive into the case. What happened that night on a lonely road between Cocoa Beach and Orlando would not only rock her world, but it would also reveal to her a terrifying truth about the tragedy. It was 10:20 p.m. when she and her husband John were returning from a day at the beach. The road was deserted, barely illuminated by the headlights of occasional passing vehicles. The car began to misfire, and John asked to pull over to the side to check the engine. As Karen held the hood, a small limousine parked behind them. On the rear window, a sticker read, "Bad Guy," an ominous omen of what was about to happen. 3 men got out of the car. Karen, her senses sharpened, crouched behind the vehicle, barely visible. One of the men approached John, demanding his belongings. Her husband's response was firm, but the stranger did not hesitate. Shouts and the sound of a resounding thump filled the air. Karen watched, transfixed, as violence took over the scene. One of the assailants pulled out a gun and, after a brief struggle, fired. The group quickly fled, leaving John in the driver's seat as the life drained from his body. Karen, her heart pounding, ran towards him, screaming in despair. When a driver stopped, her plea for help was punctuated by the anguish in her voice. "Please help me, my husband." The police report revealed heartbreaking details. John had been shot in the chest, and although emergency services arrived within minutes, they were unable to save him. Karen, who was expecting a child, now faced an abyss of loss and trauma. At just 28 years old, this woman, whose life had been a mixture of struggle and success, was caught in a dark conundrum. But was it really just a random attack? Or was there something else going on than what met the eye? Fate seemed to have woven a perfect story for Karen and John. Their life together, though brief, was filled with passionate moments and shared dreams. Under the top of what seemed like happiness, there were fractures that would only show up with time. During their trip to the Florida coast, every detail of their dynamic showed a mixture of genuine love and hidden tensions that threatened to explode. Karen, with her ambition and natural charisma, shone with every step she took. Her rising career as a model and television host not only brought her prestige, but also a growing network of influential contacts that fascinated John and at the same time fueled his insecurities. Although she constantly assured him that her success was also his, John couldn't help but remember his first wife's betrayal. The ghosts of the past would not leave him alone, and these shadows sometimes seeped into his relationship with Karen. During their stay at Cocoa Beach, moments of enjoyment alternated with quiet arguments. Long walks on the beach and romantic dinners were interspersed with casual comments that revealed John's concerns. Through it all, they both strove to maintain harmony. Karen, who was already showing signs of her pregnancy, seemed more radiant than ever, which often managed to dispel any storm clouds that loomed between them. Things were different on the last day of the trip. Early in the morning, everything was calm. But as they packed up to go back to Orlando in the evening, John was surprisingly quiet. Karen tried to cheer him up with jokes and smiles, but he only responded with monosyllables. When they finally departed, the atmosphere in the car was tense, charged with unspoken words. It was in this silence that fate decided to intervene in a most cruel way. As they drove farther down the empty road, the night covered everything in its dark blanket. The car began to show unexpected faults, prompting John to pull over to the side of the road. They both got out to inspect the problem. Karen, leaning against the car, looked up at the sky, while John checked the engine with a flashlight in hand. After a while, he entered the car to turn off the radio and pick up his cigarettes. It was then that the lights of another vehicle broke the darkness. A small limousine pulled up behind them. From that moment on, nothing would ever be the same again. The sudden screech of brakes broke the silence of the night, and Karen looked up only to see a small limousine pulling up behind them. The sticker reading "Bad Boy" glowed faintly under the light of the headlights. Before she could react, she heard rapid footsteps and a murmur of voices. Fear gripped her. Instinctively, she ducked behind the open hood, using the car's frame as a makeshift shelter. Shouts began to fill the air, a mixture of demands and threats. A man in a dark sweatshirt and black and white Converse shoes approached the driver's side. "Give me the wallet," he demanded in a harsh voice. John, in his determined temper, flatly refused. "I don't have anything for you," he retorted, but his tone only seemed to fuel the aggressiveness of the strangers. One of them, visibly irritated, pulled out a small gun and pointed it straight into the car. Karen could see everything from her hiding place. Her heart was pounding. But she knew that moving could mean being discovered. The first shot rang out like thunder in the still night. John tried to struggle, pushing the car door against his attacker, but the other two men held him back. The shots continued, shattering the car window and Karen's hope that John might emerge unharmed. She watched helplessly, holding her breath as she watched her husband slump to the seat. The assailants, apparently nervous, began to search for something inside the vehicle. Their movements were clumsy and desperate, but in their haste, they forgot John's wallet, the alleged motive for their attack. Mere seconds later, they ran back to the limousine and disappeared into the darkness, leaving behind a scene that looked like something out of a nightmare. Karen remained hidden for a few moments, trembling and unable to process what had just happened. Finally, she mustered enough courage to run to the car. She found John motionless, his eyes closed, and the interior of the vehicle covered in dark stains that spoke volumes. Her piercing scream broke the night once again, as she desperately searched for help in the middle of the deserted road. The investigators, after analyzing Karen's account, began to notice inconsistencies that they found difficult to ignore. The description of the car with the inscription "Bad Guy" had not been reported by any witnesses in the vicinity, and the manner in which the assailants fled without thoroughly searching the car or noticing Karen seemed too strange. In addition, the fact that John, being an experienced mechanic, had not personally checked the car left an uncomfortable sense of doubt. A review of the Newell's past revealed a disturbing incident that had occurred 3 months earlier. One night, while the couple was enjoying the tranquility of their home, Karen heard noises coming from the backyard. Alarmed, she asked John to investigate. Upon leaving, he came face to face with 2 masked individuals armed with baseball bats. Although the neighbor's light managed to scare them away, John was not unharmed. The injuries he sustained, though not serious, were a silent warning that something darker might be brewing. The incident had been shelved after an unsuccessful investigation, but now it took on new meaning. Could it be that John had enemies? The theory of a random robbery was beginning to crumble, especially considering that the wallet was left intact during the most recent attack. Investigators explored the possibility that someone close to him might have had a motive to harm him. As detectives looked further into the Newell's inner group, they came across a name that kept coming up: Peter Pigia. This young surfer, an acquaintance of Karen's, had recently entered the couple's life under seemingly casual circumstances. His apartment had been broken into, and Karen, ever compassionate, had convinced John to offer him temporary lodging on her property. What was initially meant to be a short stay was extended, and Peter, with his youthful charisma, soon became a constant figure in the Newells' lives. Peter's physical attractiveness and his closeness to Karen aroused suspicion among investigators. They wondered if the relationship between the two had transcended the bounds of friendship. The news of her pregnancy added another layer of complexity to the case. The possibility that Peter was the baby's real father raised a stronger motive behind the tragedy. As detectives discovered more about her past and how she was connected to Peter, the case took a sudden turn that brought up new questions that could change the whole story of the attack on the side of the road. The image of the 29-year-old widow, devastated by the loss of her husband, was beginning to crumble in the face of a murkier picture. The relationship between Karen and Peter had not only been more intimate than she would admit, but also appeared to have been tinged with manipulation and carefully concealed secrets. Peter, questioned at the police station, showed a surprising calmness. His apparently solid and consistent account matched Karen's initial version. He admitted to having consumed alcohol and light drugs on the beach, before setting out on the journey home. However, details of her personal life began to cast shadows on her character. Karen's claims about his job as a production assistant at the TV station turned out to be fabrications. Peter did not have steady employment. He lived on odd jobs, making him a young man with modest aspirations but outsized ambitions. Some of her friends confirmed that she had been seeing Peter for a long time before he moved into the Newell's backyard. The young man boasted among friends about his affair with a married woman, describing their passionate encounters and first contact on the Port St. Lucie highway as something out of a movie. Their relationship was more than just emotional. Peter was sure that Karen was carrying his child, and the fact that they spent a lot of money together only added to this view. Investigators followed the trail of the gun used in the crime, a .22 caliber, and decided to look into possible links to Karen's past. It was then that the woman's ex-husband became a key piece of the puzzle. This man, with whom Karen had secret meetings in hotels even after her marriage to John, provided disturbing information. According to him, she was not only adept at weaving webs of deceit, but also had a particular ability to manipulate those around her. Karen used her business trips as an alibi to lead a double life. While on the one hand she was building a public image as an up-and-coming young model, on the other she was cultivating relationships that seemed to serve darker interests. The connection with Peter, the parallel life with her ex-husband, and the details of her relationship with John began to form an image of someone whose ambition and capacity for manipulation knew no bounds. The trends were too obvious for the police to ignore. John's money, assets, and promise to always be there for Karen were at the center of a complex web of lies. Peter's possible involvement in the crime, and the relationship between the two, was now one of the main lines of investigation. Investigations led to an unexpected twist when officers discovered that Karen had been involved in questionable activities long before she met John. In 1989, she had been convicted of credit card forgery and embezzlement, and her probation included strict conditions prohibiting possession of weapons or related devices. In November 1993, she managed to convince her ex-husband to give her a gun under the pretext of protecting herself after John had been attacked months earlier. He never returned it, a detail that investigators considered highly suspicious. Karen's arrest, 8 days after John's murder, was the first major blow in the case. While she was in custody, decisive evidence emerged that put her version of events in check. Her stepbrother, Luis Aragon, confessed that Karen had proposed a plan to obtain John's life insurance fortune, valued at $500,000. Although he rejected the offer, he recounted how Karen, far from being discouraged, turned to Peter to carry out her dark intentions. According to Luis, Karen had already tried to organize an attack on John in November 1993. That night, Peter and an accomplice showed up in front of the Newell home, ready to execute a plan Karen had meticulously designed. But their plans were foiled when a neighbor came out, turned on the lights, and went into the yard. The failure left Karen furious, but unwilling to abandon her goal. Her insistence on going ahead with her plans evidenced her determination to get the money at any cost. She kept Peter trapped with promises and attentions, using his youth and inexperience to her advantage. With no formal education or resources, he was the perfect accomplice for her ambitions. She convinced him to move into John's house shortly before Thanksgiving, using the excuse that they needed someone to watch the property. Investigators confirmed Luis's statements by reviewing insurance documents. Karen had not only taken out an initial $250,000 policy shortly after they were married, but then added several additional contracts that doubled the amount. Her insistence on collecting payments immediately after John's murder only fueled suspicion. Although some companies had begun transferring small sums, the larger ones paused payments upon learning of the investigations. On March 28, 1994, Peter was arrested and charged with accessory to murder. Although Karen denied any direct involvement in the crime, prosecutors argued that she had used her manipulative skills to convince Peter to carry out the attack. Karen's ability to trick people was disturbing, and the evidence gathered during the investigation showed that she was cold and planned her moves precisely. Her confession not only detailed her role in the plan to eliminate John, but also how she had used the false pregnancy as a tool to influence Peter and keep him under her control. The revelation that Karen was carrying an IUD, which made conception impossible, exposed her strategy to emotionally manipulate those who orbited her life. During the preliminary hearings, Peter's testimony was crucial. In his deposition, he detailed how Karen had promised him a future together, describing John as the only obstacle standing in the way of their happiness. Under her influence, he agreed to cooperate, even leading her to dispose of the gun that had caused John's death in a nearby body of water. The recovery of the object, with the serial number linking it directly to Karen's ex-husband, solidified the case against her. The defense attempted to portray Karen as a victim of circumstance, manipulated by an impulsive and jealous young man. They alleged that the life insurance had been a standard procedure completed by John himself, which they claimed undermined Karen's alleged motive. However, the evidence found and the ex-husband's statements dismantled this version. It was he who confirmed that Karen had requested the self-defense weapon, which ended up being the tool used in the crime. The trial was fast approaching, and her defense, seeing few exits, proposed a plea bargain to the prosecution. Minutes before the official start of the trial, she confessed her role in organizing John's murder, a desperate attempt to avoid the death penalty. Despite this, she was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Peter, as the direct executioner, received 25 years in prison with the possibility of parole, resulting in his release in 2010. Unfortunately, Karen's sentence was not enough to make John's family feel better. They thought that he was still a threat, even though he was in jail. The words of family members reflected their fear. Karen would continue to seek out new victims for her manipulations when the opportunity presented itself. Despite the severity of the sentences, she was dissatisfied, arguing that the difference between her punishment and Peter's was unfair. For her, the real burden of guilt should fall on the executioner, minimizing her own role in the crime. These statements only reinforce the image of a woman incapable of taking responsibility for her actions, perpetuating the coldness that characterized her.